Hello, everybody. Welcome to the normative webinar titled Mastering Double Materiality, your CSRD Roadmap. It is 3 o'clock. While we wait for people to join, if you could drop in the chat where you're joining us from today. CSRD is an EU directive, but as some of us already know, it affects companies outside the EU as well. So I'm super curious to hear where the crowd is coming in from. Oh, we already got some UK representation, Spain, global companies. Melmu, I feel like the presenter for Eurovision right here, but maybe that's a niche comment. Okay, we're at 3:01. We've got a tight program, so we're actually going to get in on it quickly, but I see we've got lots of representation across the EU and globally. So a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session is for 45 minutes. We have a packed agenda like I previously mentioned, so we're going to try to fit in as much Q&A in that 45 minutes at the end. However, if we run over, feel free to stay on. This will, though, be recorded and shared with you post-session in an email. So if you've got to jump off for any reason before the 45 minutes or after, don't worry, you'll be able to look and get all the information later when it's recorded and sent out to you. Please submit questions. Like there's a lot of still people that don't know about DMAs or specific DMAs, and you've got all the experts on the call. So use our question box. That's not the chat, it's a question box. That way we can prioritize and get to as many questions as possible when we get to the Q&A. And as always, we're aiming to get you the best content. So we're gonna send out a survey post-webinar. It takes a couple minutes. Please answer that. Agenda today. We're going to start off with double materiality. What is it and why does it matter? And we've got Normative's very own Dr. Alex Schmidt, who's our head of science, sustainability, and research, all the way from Paris to go into that. Then Samantha, who's part of our CSRD consultancy team, which is going to talk about navigating the essentials of a DMA. And then we're super excited to have one of our very own customers, Flying Tiger, Emily Richards here, who's gone through a DMA process. So Samantha and her are going to have a discussion on what that looked like and with some learnings from that. And I'm your host, Sarah Bose-Peterson, the product marketing manager here at Normative. While we're on this topic, this is just one of a couple of our CSRD series of webinars. Next month, we're going to be diving into region-specific webinars. So we actually have a really cool offering for any UK-based customers with a webinar specifically about CSRD and the UK. So please sign up for that. That will be shared. And then we are going to have a specific Sweden webinar as well for any Swedish people that are looking into CSRD or how that will affect them. We have a Swedish specific webinar, and you can find those in the chat where you can sign up for those. So we look forward to seeing you. But a little quick intro to what is Normative. So Normative here, our mission is to make known and reduce the sustainability impact of all economic activities on the planet. And we are a carbon accounting platform with expertise in this specific niche, and then how it's going to relate to your compliance and reporting needs, which ties into CSRD, which brings us to what we're talking about here, the DMAs. But I won't spend too much time on that because I'm going to hand it over. Oh, real quick. So we have a poll for you guys. So our question for everybody in the chat is going to be, have you started your DMA? If you don't know where your poll is, down on the bottom right, if you hit poll, we'd love to hear where you guys are in your CSR journey in regards to the DMA. We have just started. Feel free to submit your vote. And the ambition, of course, is that after today's webinar, you'll be ready to get started on your DMA if you haven't. And if you have any other questions, please ask today, and then we can get you a little bit more knowledge so you leave here knowing more than you did coming in. So with that being said, we're going to hand over to Dr. Alex, who's going to be talking about double materiality, what it is and why does it matter.
Thank you so much for the nice intro and overview. Yeah, I'm Alex. I'm going to guide you through a bit of the high-level view, especially for those of you who have answered. I'm just looking at the poll data here, either no clue what DMA is, well, we have a few of them. Those probably who have not started yet, but I hope also others who have already done their DMA or in the process of, that they will take something away also from this intro that I will facilitate here for you. So I can assume, or I do assume, that most of you who have come across CSRD have also come across double materiality of some shape or form. But I want to open up a bit your view on it's not just, oh, I have this mandatory DMA checkbox that I have to do in the process of being compliant with CSRD, but there's actually more that you can get out of the DMA. The traditional view of how you are assessing your company's, environmental exposure, so to speak, has been this what is called the financial materiality view, or also sometimes referred to as the outside-in assessment. Meaning, how does the environment affect my financial bottom line? So very much here's the company, what risks, maybe also opportunities are out there that could affect our organization. So think of things such as climate change regulations. That's of course part of the environment, right? So we're not just talking about the physical environment, nature, but also about the environment of your industry, which leads to consumer preferences, investor preferences. Those are shifting right now as well. So those things can impact your financial performance in a material way. But also, and especially, supply chain disruptions. We see this over and over again, that companies are really, really struggling right now with reconfiguring their supply chain, making it more resilient because of real physical changes in the environment, so in nature, that disrupt supply chain. So that's a big consideration, and one companies have to take into account under the CSRD in a sense of assessing the materiality, the kind of size or the impact of such environmental changes on their own performance. Now, that's quote unquote always been the case, meaning that's a traditional view many companies have taken. Now, the interesting part about the double materiality assessment required by the CSRD is now this impact materiality. I call it here like a new dimension. It's not entirely new, but it's one that is now being mandated, and that's the new part. It's the inside-out assessment of what I call here externalities, cost, because oftentimes it is about how does my business affect the environment, unfortunately in a negative shape. So think about your carbon emissions. That's the most prominent example, of course, very close to what normative does with our clients day to day. Your carbon emissions have, of course, an impact on the environment, on society in terms of pollution. Same with waste management. Here also, again, it links to your supply chain. The selection, the choice of your suppliers influences heavily the amount of waste you produce, also the amount of emissions you produce. And then also linked to topics like labor practices, again, mostly across your supply chain in your production. But this all is how you run your business, how does this affect the environment and society around you. So that is this new dimension now demanded, required by the CSRD under the double materiality assessment. So together, I would call this a holistic view, not just, oh, what are the risks for my business because things are changing around me, but actually, oh, I am also have an influence on the environment, right? How do I contribute to my operations to environmental changes there? What I want to highlight here is, in terms of importance, it is not just, oh, I have to jump through the hoop of doing the DMA under the CSRD. Yes, of course, the DMA is the foundation of your CSRD report. And my colleague Sapanta will take you a bit through the details there. But it gives you an overview of what topics are actually material. So it sets the foundation for your reporting. Sure, it is important for being compliant, for managing risk factors. Yes. However, very, very importantly, I want to encourage everyone to use this also to see this as an opportunity. There is more to just, I have done my DMA, check, what do I have to report on? Okay, let's move on. I just had a discussion here at the conference with a person who luckily shared my enthusiasm for there's opportunity in this, opportunity to uncover other risk factors, to actually realize, oh, wait a second, this aspect is material to my business, and I can have a positive change, influence, effect on this area. So that's something that the DMA can also uncover. Very important decision grade data for your not just sustainability planning, but your whole operations, supply chain, product design, etc. But this is also in detail explained in our CSRD guidebook, handbook, that we have just launched a while ago. I see here a link popping up, so you can click on that one if you want to know more about the DMA and other topics, but you're here now with us. So I also, of course, hope that you get a lot out of this, this webinar. And for this, my colleague Subhanta will now take you through more details around these topics of materiality that I was just kind of motivating and scratching the surface of. So, Subhanta, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Alex, for that overview. So let's shift our attention and focus now on the details of the double materiality assessment, the DMA. What are some of the key components that you as a company need to consider when starting your DMA journey? And to begin with, you need to first understand your value chain, which means documenting down your business activities, your products and services, the geographic locations of these activities, who your business partners are, and throughout your entire value chain. So not only your own operations, but also your upstream and downstream. Next, it's important to collect stakeholder feedback, and the primary stakeholder group that you want to focus on identifying are the affected stakeholders. Those are the ones that are impacted by your company. And you need to develop engagement strategies to gather their insights. And if direct contact is impossible, then representatives can be considered, just as long as you're ensuring that their voices are effectively represented. Once you have an understanding of your value chain and have gathered stakeholder feedback, you can then use these insights to identify your actual and your potential impacts, risks, and opportunities, your IROs. You can start assessing them as well. And this is where the distinction between risks and opportunities and impacts becomes apparent. Your financial evaluations are related to your risks and opportunities. And to illustrate this distinction, we have an example on the slide where we begin by examining the ESRS topic, S1 Own Workforce. Within this topic, there is a subtopic named Working Conditions and a subtopic named Health and Safety. And these topics are defined within the ESRS framework. Now, a potential impact that a company might identify within these topics is a potential negative effect that a company might have on its employees due to the exposure to dangerous chemicals. From a risk perspective, which is connected to your financial standpoint of the company, the same scenario could potentially result in legal actions by the affected employees seeking financial compensation. So this scenario really highlights the potential harm to employees and the associated financial implications for your company. Once you've identified your IROs, the assessment process begins. So you have factors such as scale, how grave is the situation, scope, how many people does it affect, irremediability, how hard is it to remediate the negative effects, and likelihood, how likely is it to happen if it's a potential impact or risk. Well, those will need to be considered within your assessment. And for risks and opportunities, the focus is on evaluating the potential magnitude and the likelihood of the situation. So after you've assessed and scored these IROs, you also need to set some sort of a threshold that determines which topics, subtopics, and subtopics are deemed material for your company and which ones are not. So basically, you're saying that everything above this threshold is material and everything below is not. Now, this was a simplified overview of some of the aspects to consider during your DMA, but it's important to acknowledge that there are more details involved. And also the DMA process, it typically requires the involvement of multiple individuals, since the knowledge is often spread among various team members. So for instance, involving your finance team might be beneficial for assessing your risks and opportunities, since they're related to financial effects. And since so many people usually are involved in the process, there are quite a few IROs to identify and assess. So the DMA process can be quite time consuming, can span around from 1.5 to 3 months. And it's also worth noting that after you finalize your DMA, it's worth getting it checked by your auditor already at this stage. You wouldn't want to wait until after data collection to know if a topic should have been included and assessed as material according to your auditor. Now, to put all of this into perspective, We have a guest with us today, Emily from Flying Tiger, and she's going to walk us through their DMA journey and share their insights on the DMA process. So Emily, thank you for being here. And maybe you could just start off by introducing yourself so our listeners get to know you a bit better.
Thanks for having me. I'm Emily Richards. I'm a sustainability specialist at Flying Tiger. And in my role, we work with all things sustainability, setting the strategy, working with CSRD, working with the DMA. So excited to get into our experience with the DMA with you.
Wonderful. So let's just start off. Maybe you could just walk us through what was the initial step in your DMA process? You knew you needed to report on CSRD and you needed to do the DMA. How did that journey unfold? And what was the first thing that you thought about?
Yeah, so we saw the regulation coming. We knew it was big. We knew it was beyond the scope of just our team. It involves finance, HR, legal, everyone. So our ambition is to be leaders in sustainable retail. So we wanted to be kind of first movers on this, and we conducted our DMA in October 2023. So this was before all the final data points were finalized. But it started off by just understanding we need to think about this. It's a big process. How should we go about it?
All right. And reflecting on your DMA experience, or first, let me just ask, did you get any help, outside help, when you did this? Any external consultancies? Yeah.
Exactly. So like I was mentioning, it's beyond just sustainability. It covers the whole company. So being early on in the process, it was important for us to work with a consultant just to collaborate and test different methodologies and define what's a good process for our company. And it was a new assessment for everyone. So for us, it was really important to bring in a consultant and also manage all the different stakeholders because it's a lot of people contributing to this assessment. So it was really useful to engage and align the company using external consultants.
Okay. And just what advice would you give to others regarding hiring an external consultant? Do you think it's manageable to deal with the whole DMA process by yourself, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it's always manageable. It just depends on your ambition and the resources. So for Flying Tiger, we definitely saw it as a huge task, and it was beneficial to bring in external consultants. And I think if you're starting your DMA process now, external consultants have tested their processes. They know the methodology. They know the gray zones of how to define things. So I think it's really beneficial to bring in expertise from outside to help. And the first year, it's a huge learning curve. So it's helpful to have this guidance when you're setting up these processes, creating new systems, and how to work with the DMA. So I think the first year, it really helps just to set the foundation to bring in someone who knows the process if you're not familiar already.
Great. I think that's great insights for some of our listeners. If we look at the value chain aspect for a second, it's really an enormous task to understand your entire value chain. And a lot of people find this quite challenging. How did you at Flying Tiger deal with the value chain part? And was it included in your IRO assessment, or did you decide to separate them?
Yeah, so for us, we made this the first step of our DMA process. We already had a good understanding because we have a bill of materials, so we know where all the materials are coming from. And we've been carbon accounting since 2019, so we understood scope 1, 2, and 3 and our impacts in this way. But this was the first step of the DMA process to really define the value chain, and it's kind of the foundation for the rest of the assessment. So it's important to really make this a concrete first step in the DMA.
Mm-hmm. So maybe the conclusion is that if you already have a good understanding and documentation of your value chain, you can jump a little bit right into the IROs. But if you don't have that, maybe separating them. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, I think it's the foundation. So definitely documenting it, and it really makes it clear of, okay, our impact is in really early stages of downstream or, in our own operation. So yeah, it definitely helps to define the IROs.
All right, great. And then if we go back to the impacts, risks, and opportunities, one can identify these on topic level, subtopic level, subtopic level, like I just went through. What level did you at Flying Tiger conduct your DMA in?
So Flying Tiger went all the way to the subtopic level. I think this depends on the maturity of the company. So I think it's important to take it as granular as you can. But the DMA process is about highlighting areas that you know and understand, and also areas that you need to investigate more. So each year, the DMA process will improve, and the quality and coverage of your knowledge will increase. But the more you work with the topics, the more you will understand your IROs and how to manage them. So I think it's about if you can take it as far as you can, work with the subtopics. If you're just beginning in an area, take it on a higher level. And I think that's how I would approach it.
Mm-hmm. Good advice. All right, then looking at the participants, you already mentioned this a little bit, but which participants or stakeholders participated in your DMA process, and were they any different from assessing the financial materiality compared to the impact one?
So I think this is also why it's important to have the value chain mapped, because then you can highlight where you should look for stakeholders. And I think with stakeholders, they can be different for financial impact and impact materiality. So for us, we use the value chain mapping to identify different people to contribute. And for example, we thought factory workers were a huge area. So we looked at how can we engage with them and interview them and get quality input, whereas consumers is a huge area for us as well. But how do we get quality information from our consumers? So it's, I think, choosing strategically how to engage with your stakeholders, and where you don't have quality stakeholders, getting academic and scientific research to fill these gaps as well is very important. But I think documenting the process for how you choose these and why you choose these is kind of the foundation of where I would begin.
Mm-hmm. It leads me to my next question, which is, DMAs, they can be quite subjective by nature. And, just involving so many different individuals, there are going to be a lot of opinions included. Although very valuable, it's also important to keep objectivity and make it as quantifiable as possible. And you already mentioned academic research. Are there anything else that you use to make it more objective or as objective as possible?
I think in the first year, it's about defining the methodology and the choices you make. So it's about making this very clear, the methodology, defining the scope of the assessment, defining what choices you made, why you chose the threshold you did. And I think for us, we use a very clear scoring mechanism. So we defined, severity with scale, scope, and irremediability, and having a threshold between 0 and 5, and defining what does that mean to score at a 0 versus a 5. Mm-hmm. And then I think something that was a lesson learned for us is clearly stating the rationale or the source, if you can source the reason for this, because every year you work with the DMA, you're going to be building on your knowledge. So your sources can increase and improve as you get more information and more stakeholder engagement, more research develops, you can add to your rationale. But I think making it objective is clearly stating why you scored it this way and what the definition of that score means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good input there. Definitely on the sources, I think it's a good reminder for all of our listeners to document that down.
It's a big task, but it's important to do, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. You did mention thresholds as well, and that is another challenging element to the DMA. A lot of people find it hard on, how to set a threshold. What was your reasoning a little bit behind setting a threshold for what was material?
I think this is very unique by company to company. I've heard different companies take different approaches. I think it kind of depends on your ambition. It depends on your resources. Flying Tiger, we set a lower threshold, so that led to us having a much higher number of material topics. And so it's still a discussion of what is the right way to set a threshold. But I think it's the point of setting the threshold is to help prioritize the most material topics. And that's kind of a tricky statement, because I think all topics are pretty material, but how can you focus as a company to tackle your biggest impact areas and, make the biggest impact first? I think Alexander said it really nice at the beginning. You can make this a compliance exercise of like, okay, we'll only comply with these material topics, but it's really about creating impact. So how can you, maximize your impact across these areas? So in Flying Tiger, we're very ambitious, but very pragmatic. So we do have a lot of material topics, but we're figuring out how can we manage the biggest ones first and create the biggest impact. That's always our goal.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a good summary. Maybe check with the ambitions first and then set the thresholds. And my final question for you is if you're planning to have your auditor already looking at your finalized DMA, maybe they already have. What's the status?
Yeah. So we have kept the auditors in loop. We've just finished discussions having them look at the methodology. And I think it's important to keep them in the conversation just to ensure you're doing the right method and, it will be you're going in the right direction for assurance, because that is ultimately what they will be doing.
Great. Thank you. Now, Sarah, leaving it to you.
Awesome. And I see lots of questions. Friendly reminder to use the questions tab because, like we said, we've got Dr. Alex on the line, Sapanta, our CSRD specialist, and Emily, who's had firsthand experience doing a DMA. So you definitely want to get your questions in so we can get to them at the end. The wrap up here is we had Alex at the top of the hour, Dr. Alex say he did a great job of framing how the DMA can be seen as an opportunity for your business rather than a burden. Sapanta got a little bit into the process of a DMA, going through and assessing and scoring of the disclosures. And then this was a perfect wrap up with Emily taking us through what the DMA looked like for Flying Tiger, who is ahead of the game in regards to CSRD. But like the top level is that DMA is going to be mandatory for CSRD compliance. It's going to have a holistic view on both financial and impact materiality. Some of the key steps that Sapanta went over was understanding your value chain, gathering stakeholder impact, identifying and assessing impacts, risks, and opportunities. And this will form the foundation for accurate and comprehensive CSRD reporting. And the DMA process is time consuming and requires a lot of stakeholder management. So Flying Tiger used consultants, but this is going to look different from organization to organization. Now, while Flying Tiger is ahead of the curve, there is CSRD, it's upcoming. If you're ready to get started or hear more about how normative a platform and a consultancy can help you with your CSRD journey, go ahead and book a demo. Otherwise, what we're going to do here is actually get right into the Q&A because, like I said, we've got a lot of questions coming in. So let's see what we have here. So we've got all of our moderators here for you guys to get firsthand access to. I've got a great question here. We've got from Rachel, does the DMA requirement need to be run regularly? Every 12 months, where you haven't done one yet, but want to understand if it's a regular activity we need to factor in.
I can take that one. So a DMA is supposed to be done every year. Basically, it's revisited every year. The first year is going to be the heaviest year when you do everything from scratch, and then the next years you need to update it based on material changes that happen in the company. So if there are any organizational changes or anything that can affect the IROs, then you will need to update those as you go. But it's annual revisit after it's done the first year.
Awesome. And then I've got, so regarding the tiers of suppliers, how many tiers of suppliers did you include in your value chain analysis? So I don't know if this is we can also handle it from a best practices and then maybe take a look if Emily has any context on what was done at Flying Tiger. The best practice would be for?
Best practice, sorry, could you repeat the question?
So how many tiers of suppliers did you include in your value chain analysis? Tier 1, tier 2, et cetera.
Sorry. Okay, yes. So we work directly with trading houses. So that's our tier 1. And so that's minimal impact. And our team in Shanghai, we do our own auditing on tier 2 suppliers. So that's more the factory level. And that's where we have the most direct control that we can influence. But we do look at tier 3 plus on a more high level perspective, and how can we influence them through our material choices of the products we put in our store.
Awesome. So I hope that answered that question on what Flying Tiger did for tier of suppliers. I saw a really interesting question about thresholds. Let me take that one. So we have our thresholds have to be set separately for every IRO individually using some sort of qualitative factor. So Panta, I think you had an answer for this one.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to get Emily's feedback on this as well. But no, you don't need to set a threshold on every single IRO. You set a threshold collectively for them, and then you do the assessment on, okay, you have the scoring elements, and then you make the assessment that all of the ones that go above this score are material, and the ones below this score are not material. Emily, if you want to jump in and mention how you guys did it, it would be lovely to hear as well.
That's pretty much how we did it. So we have 0 to 5 scoring based on all of the criteria that we've mentioned previously. And then if it was above 2, then it was material for us. This is still a discussion if that's the right level, but for right now, that's what we're working with. But yeah, it's everything that it's collectively across all topics. So it's interesting to compare social with environmental topics, how they score against each other.
I actually have another one for Emily. While you have the spotlight on you, can you talk about the relationship with the other stakeholders like finance, HR, challenges that you had with this part? Because it is a process with a lot of stakeholders that we said today.
Yeah, so it does involve a lot of people, and I think that's part of the fun and maybe the challenge, depending on your company. For us, we had an internal working group, so I think it was finance, HR, legal, sustainability, and procurement. Maybe some other people I'm missing, but they were the core stakeholders that were working with the DMA process. I know there's different approaches to engaging internally. I've done DMA processes in my previous role where we did internal interviews with more internal stakeholders across more departments. But for Flying Tiger, we had an internal working group, and that's kind of how we engaged internally, and then used the consultants as the project managers and overview of everything.
I have a follow-up question to that. So if you had this group, how often were you meeting? How long did this process take for Flying Tiger?
Yeah, I think it definitely took a couple months, I would say. I don't remember exactly, but it started in October, and yeah, a couple months, and they would meet regularly throughout the process. And of course, at the end, you want to have the validation session to ensure all the results look sound and things are coming out correctly. So they would meet regularly, and then the final, final meeting.
Perfect. Good to hear. We've got a question in regards to, sorry, I lost the question box there. I saw it was about how CSRD affects customers of companies that need to report. It was early in the chat. But Sapanta, I know you wanted to talk to this one.
Yeah, and it's a great question because companies that need to report on CSRD, eventually they're going to be liable for their entire value chain. But what could happen is that they will need some information from their suppliers, from their customers, etc. And if you can't give them the information that they need and they can get it from your competitors, then it might be some sort of a competitive disadvantage to you. So I would really encourage everyone look into the CSRD and the ESRS standards and see what kind of data points that can be applicable to you that customers would need by you.
And then we've got one about, guys, these are coming in quick, so get your questions in. But I think this is a perfect one that ties into Dr. Alex's section. We've got, what are the risks and consequences of not engaging in this process for companies?
And I believe it also links perfectly to what Sapanta just said. I think it's important to highlight the kind of interconnectedness of this whole environment, right? Like, even though you might not be affected yourself, if there's an element in your value chain or you're part of the value chain that is affected, you would at least get asked questions about the basic, well, most of all, it is about the environmental carbon accounting side of things, but of course, social practices, governance aspects might also be required of you. So again, encouraging, to echo Sapanta's kind of recommendation that everyone to get familiar who is very likely to be affected, meaning in a value chain of larger customers. Even though it might not apply to you directly, you have to get your house in order because you will soon be asked. And we see it more and more, it being requirements for new tenders, new RFIs, RFPs, whatever is out there, that you at least can show the basic metrics companies will have to report on. And that's obviously the whole idea behind these regulation, that companies will pull in more and more other companies, even though they might be small and not affected. We don't talk today about the CSRD, but that's another one of those that would affect value chains or target value chains specifically. So honestly, I think everyone today here on the call should get started and prepared for some of the disclosure requirements.
And like we said, Flying Tiger's ahead of the game, but it's not too late, right? Everyone's going to have to do this. So get ready for this. And then we've got another question. How will the IRO results feed into CSRD? And I think Sapanta had an answer for this one.
Yeah, exactly. So after you identified your impacts, risks, and opportunities, and you've assessed them, then you're going to have a list of topics that are material for you, topics, subtopics, subtopics. There are certain data points that are connected to these topics that you will need to answer. And those data points once you've answered those, that's what you put into your CSRD report, which is going to be in your management report. So that's how that connection works.
Now, I'm getting a lot of questions for Emily and Flying Tiger, which we definitely anticipated. So we'll do a little section to get some of these questions answered. With the regards into the working of the stakeholder group you mentioned before, just the practicalities, how did they work together? Was there hybrid, physical, or virtual? Do you have any recommendation on best practices, especially hybrid, which would be the case for this person's company, and I'm sure for many others?
I think there's pros and cons to hybrid or in person or virtual completely. I think when you do workshops and group thinking, it's nice to gather people together to work together, but you have to work with what you have. So I think our company is very in person, but it is super flexible to do hybrid meetings when needed. And I think you just kind of whatever works best for your company and the ways of working of your stakeholders, I think is how I would approach it.
And then we've got something about in regards to different rankings in the IRO from consumers, suppliers, employees. How did you compile those different rankings?
Rankings, like the scorings of our different...
Oh, and the impacts and risks. Yeah, the different rankings.
So we defined what a 0 means, what a 1 means across each severity, scope, irremediability, likelihood. And so everything is very defined. And I think that's my takeaway and advice for everyone is to define all the criteria. Because I think when you work with this year over year, the results might change. You're going to learn more, things will develop, but your methodology, if you set it up correctly, it should stay the same. So I think defining all the scoring mechanisms and how you want to score, I think focus on that. And it can be unique to your company, how you see the scale. Maybe you already have some risk management tools within your company of how you manage financial risks. So you can build on these types of things for your own company.
Cool. And then we have a really concrete question with how many material topics did you end up with the end, and did you prioritize them in any order?
We have quite a few. I think most high-level topics are material. On data points, I think there's like 1,100 total. We got down to like 700 something. We're still figuring out what working with the DMA, and because this was over a year ago, so we might look into reassessing more on a high level and understanding different areas more. But yeah, I would say around 700 something data points now that we need to disclose based on our DMA.
It just shows you this is no joke, right? CSRD is massive, but it's definitely manageable. And it's cool to see from the inside how Flying Tiger is doing it. And not just managing the CSRD itself, but there's a great question about what the action plan for a company like Flying Tiger is to offset its impacts after doing the DMA and getting into CSRD. And I know this is maybe in process, but if you could speak to what you guys your ambitions are with this.
Kind of what I'm working on now. So working with the DMA, it's a really nice tool because it helps you give a framework for all these topics you might not have worked with. So we're very advanced in circularity. We're very advanced in climate. We've been working with these areas. That's how our strategy is based. But areas like biodiversity or water, these are newer areas for our company. So we're kind of thinking big picture strategy. How do we want to manage this? What is our impact? Is it direct impact or not? Usually it's not that direct. So how can we manage this through our product choices or through engagement with suppliers? And yeah, it's a fun task working with the DMA. I would say doing the DMA is very fun, but getting into details and using it for something is also a nice, fun challenge.
And we did have a question that just came in, but you might have just answered it. Have there been any unexpected benefits of going through a DMA?
I think it's a really nice tool to engage the whole company because for Flying Tiger, we're really ambitious on sustainability. All departments are trained regularly on different sustainability topics. We know what we need to do. It's about product material choices, and transport are our biggest climate areas. But going through this process, it really opens eyes for people who don't look at it every day, day to day. And it's a nice tool to like engage sustainability throughout the company. So I think that's the nice part of it.
Very cool. And then I just want to make sure that we get Emily here because of that firsthand. There was something about tooling. And I know you mentioned risk assessment tools and you guys used consultants. If you could speak of maybe why you decided to go that route with consultancy for Flying Tiger with the DMAs?
Yeah, so when we did it, the final guidelines weren't published. It's an evolving methodology. So it was really useful for us to like test and challenge our ideas and come up with the methodology ourselves. And also having the external consultants, they can help set the framework that we can work with year over year. So I think that was kind of the reason we went with using consultants. And I think if you're starting now, consultants, they have a lot of experience now, depending where you're based, but you can find consultants who know what they're doing, what's a good process, how to engage with different challenges that you will face doing a DMA. So it's definitely a useful resource, but it depends on your company. Maybe you want to do it in-house, but yeah, it's a big project.
For sure. We have new questions popping in all the time. This will be more about the CSRD itself. Are all the data points, and maybe not specific to Flying Tiger, but to everybody on the call, are all the data points in the topic mandatory to report on in a material topic, or can some data points in the topic, subtopic, or subtopic be disclosed? Sapanta, maybe you'd like to take this one?
Yeah, there are certain data points in ESRS2 that are mandatory, or not certain, all of the data points in ESRS2 are mandatory. Then it's based on your double materiality assessment. So the topics that you assess as material, they should be, the data points connected to those are required to answer unless they are voluntary. So there are some data points that are marked as voluntary. And if there are certain data points that are marked as phased-in requirements, which means that you can postpone them for 1 to 3 years, you don't have to answer it the first year. And there are also certain data points on metric level that you can decide to omit, which means you don't have to answer them if you have a good enough reasoning, and the reasoning needs to be very, very, how do you say, like it needs to be a good reasoning for not doing it based on your stakeholders. If they need the information then you can't not have that information in your CSRD report. But if you think they don't need the information, then you can basically omit those. I think that's pretty much it. And then you also have the data points that are marked as IRO ones, and those you have to answer for all of the topics. So those are mandatory. Maybe went a little bit too fast here, but there are a lot of details to you need to consider when you start this process.
I think that's kind of a sum up of the DMA and CSRD, right? The devil will be in the details. We've got a question here. Will third-party, i.e. international companies headquartered outside the EU with EU subsidiaries, need to comply with DMA as well? Dr. Alex, I think you have an answer for this one.
Yeah, so in general, the CSRD will also apply to non-EU entities. There are several thresholds speaking about details and granularity, but in essence, as early as next year, it could already apply to your entity, even though you might not be a EU company per se. So for this, I would encourage you to check out our carbon legislation tracker. I think it's partly also covered by the CSRD handbook that Michelle linked earlier. So there are a lot of resources there to consult that we have on our homepage that you can find there. But yes, so non-EU entities need to also get ready for CSRD. There are thresholds and then phasing periods, whatever. And also some of the details for non-EU entities are still being discussed. But in essence, you have to get ready for it, yes.
And that's a perfect segue for, again, we are going to be going in depth into country specifics for the CSRD webinar series. And our next month, we actually have one called CSRD in the UK. So companies that may think I'm outside the EU, it's not going to affect me. UK companies, join that webinar and you can hear more about what your next steps would be. We are getting to the tail end of the webinar and definitely getting a slowdown on some of the questions. Please get them in. Otherwise, like I said, this is going to be a recorded session, and we will definitely be able to follow up with anybody. Oh, we've got a great question actually from a normative customer in here. It says, we are already working with normative to report our scope 1, 2, and 3. Any suggestions on how to use that for the DMA? Samantha?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you can, if you're doing, for example, your scope 3s with spend-based data, then you have a lot of good insights on who are your biggest suppliers, or some of the raw materials that you import, what are the biggest ones. There are like a lot of valuable information that you can use in your DMA, and that will make it quite objective and quantifiable as well, which you want the DMA to be as much as possible. So there are a lot of value in starting your carbon calculations before doing your DMA, actually. Right, great.
Okay, so this has been super. We've gotten all the different viewpoints here on the DMA, but remember the DMA is just the beginning of the CSRD journey. We've got a CSRD guide on the normative website. We've got an excellent series of webinars already recorded and some coming up. And we always love hearing from our customers. So Emily, thank you so much for joining us today from Flying Tiger to talk about the DMA and kind of the journey that you guys have taken on CSRD. And while we're all here getting started, CSRD is here to stay. So there's lots more to come from normative based on that. So we want to say thanks again for attending. We'll be recorded and sent out. And please, please, please take that webinar or the survey that we'll send out so we can continue giving you the best content possible. Have a great rest of your day, folks.